Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. My name is Rebecca Schultz. I am the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas in the province of Alberta, and it is an honor to be here in the CRIN Pavilion. Thank you so much to CRIN for hosting us here today. This is an exceptional opportunity to talk a little bit about Alberta's leadership, specifically when it comes to methane emissions reduction. In Alberta, we've taken an approach where we have worked with industry, making sure that we're looking at market-based approaches like carbon offsets and pairing that with our regulatory requirements, directly supporting the technologies that industry then is putting in place. And we are seeing results. So in Alberta, we set a methane emissions reduction target of 45%, and that was since 2014. Just last year, we were able to announce that we surpassed our goals when it came to emissions reduction in that area 3 years ahead of schedule. And now we are beyond 52% methane emissions reductions from upstream oil and gas since 2014 in the province of Alberta. Almost 15,000 well sites and facilities have been inspected, preventing nearly 17 million tons of emissions from being released. And this new technology now is not only being used in Alberta, it's being used around the world. And I know that some of my colleagues here on the stage today are going to be able to talk a little bit about how exactly that happened and the impact that it's having in Alberta, Canada, and around the world. So this isn't just an Alberta issue. I know that as you walk around the floors of COP, you hear this right across the world, and whether that be from industry, from governments, or stakeholders. And I do think that this is an area where Alberta not only is we're very proud of our leadership, but I think we have an obligation to share our leadership and our learnings with other jurisdictions around the world. So with that, I'm going to introduce today's panelists. I will introduce you by name, and then you will have an opportunity to tell everybody a little bit about yourselves. So our panelists, starting on my left, Justin Reamer, CEO of Emissions Reduction Alberta. We have Scott Volk, Director of Emissions and Innovation with Tourmaline Oil. We have Stéphane Germain, CEO of GHG SAT, and John Adams, who's the President and CEO of the Natural Gas Innovation Fund, or NGIF. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. And I'll start with you, Justin. You can just introduce yourself, tell the folks who've joined us this morning just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Minister. Pleasure to share the stage with you and our other panelists. So Emissions Reduction Alberta, I know many of you in this room know who we are. We fund late-stage technology demonstrations to support technologies that both reduce emissions and, just as importantly, grow the economy, create jobs and create economic competitiveness. And we've been behind the support and the technology de-risking of a number of methane both monitoring and abatement technologies within the province. I'm excited to tell the story. It's a story that the globe needs to know more about in terms of how the government has enabled through funding, through regulatory, through other collaborations with industry to see market decreases, as the minister indicated, a 52% reduction in methane. We've seen significant results in our 15-year history, now investing over $1 billion in projects that are worth $7 billion. And I'll get into a little bit more of the description of some of the technologies, as well as my panelists here, to talk about the global leadership we're demonstrating in methane reduction.
Okay, I'm Scott Volk. I'm the Director of Emissions and Innovation at Tourmaline. And for people that don't know Tourmaline, we're Canada's largest natural gas producer. So we have developments in both Alberta and BC, and we're really active in the emissions reduction space. For Tourmaline, that looks like environmental stewardship kind of through all aspects, whether that be air, land, water. We're looking at environmental performance on all parts. One of the big focuses that we've had is on methane. So we are happy to be joined up with NGIF to run the NGIF Emissions Testing Center, which is a center that focuses on methane development or helping technologies develop methane abatement technologies and detection technologies in the space. So happy to get into all the different things that we do on the rest of the panel.
And I'm Stéphane Germain with GHG SAT. So GHG SAT is one of these companies that has been funded by two of the parties on the stage and is one of our customers on the stage. It's kind of fun being on the stage with all of you. And we operate our own satellites in orbit today. We have 12 in orbit today that monitor methane everywhere around the world, including Alberta, including Canada. So we use that information to help operators first understand control and reduce their emissions, and then also help governments understand the challenges they have as well.
And finally, hi, good morning, everyone, and good morning, Mr. Thank you very much. So my name is John Adams. I'm the president CEO of NGF Capital. We run an organization that essentially, as Scott noted, we are a technology and innovation program and organization. We accelerate clean tech startups, specifically on methane with Alberta, but certainly across Canada, we have a variety of clean tech solutions that lower emissions. We have a number of companies that we funded, including GHGSat. We work with our innovation ecosystem partners like ERA and Alberta Innovates, CRIN as well. And we have an industry-led technology and innovation program where Tourmaline is part of a couple of our things, which you'll hear about. And the goal here is for Alberta to continue to reduce emissions. Our mandate is both economic and environmental performance.
Well, and I like that a number of you have raised the importance of ensuring a strong economy and the economics of these projects as much as focusing on the environmental outcomes. And I think that that's going to be a little bit of our discussion today. And so I would like you each to address, first off, just what specific lessons have we learned, specifically in Alberta, about our approach to methane emissions reduction and how that can be adapted to help other jurisdictions, maybe those with less mature oil and gas industries, or those that may lack some of the financial resources or have different regulatory structures than we do. You know I have thoughts on this in terms of taking an approach that is not just, I would say, punitive from a regulatory perspective, but really allowing flexibility for industry to meet their goals while also remaining economically competitive, which we know is important for affordable, safe, reliable energy. So who wants to go first? We can start with you, Justin.
Sure. So the great thing about Alberta is we have this entrepreneurial risk-taking culture. We're not afraid to try things. While other number of jurisdictions are talking about different things and often sort of have that paralysis by analysis type mentality, Alberta's had a strong history, particularly in its energy sector, of being very entrepreneurial, innovative, and solving problems. And so I think it's through that culture and that approach and the government working collaboratively with the industry over multiple years to know that methane emissions were an issue for the sector. How could we work collectively together to help resolve that with a mixture of regulatory goals and targets, as well as policies and technology incentives that could facilitate the de-risking and the deployment of some technologies that have seen that market decrease. So if you compare our emission profile to that of the US, our closest neighbor, where a lot of our technology is also supporting the development of oil and gas in the US as well. You've seen a marked decrease, and I'd love for Stefan to talk about what his satellites see in terms of methane emissions over Canada versus the US right now around oil and gas. It is a marked contrast. And just specifically for ERA, what we've been investing in through the tier fund and utilizing those tier funds to support industry to try technologies that are difficult to get the financing or capital on their own, and difficult for the businesses to be the first trier unless they have some sort of incentive and sort of a capital risk mitigation to then be the first trier. Our funding has leveraged their business case and their ability to be that first trier and that first adopter on a number of the technologies. And when we're talking about emissions reduction, the other important thing we've found that we're very good at, you can't reduce emissions without first getting accurate measurement. And for years, we've been not good, sort of arcane technology around the specifics of methane emissions and the measurement of it. And the technologies that we've helped support, like GHGSat, like Cube, like Cuva, that are based in Calgary, are enabling much more precision-based measuring of emissions on site. And once you know what's happening on your industrial site in terms of emissions, you can therefore more specifically and precisely address the mitigation of that. So we're seeing tremendous increases, as the minister said, getting to 52% reduction now of emissions reductions, in part through the measurement technologies that are now being developed and deployed, enabling those companies to specifically address, as well as some of the abatement. And the integration of things like artificial intelligence, machine learning in the tools and the measurement has just taken off significantly, I'd say, in the last 5 years, to the point where the products that we're developing and building in Alberta, we're now exporting around the world and actually being used in other markets even more so now than in Canada.
Yeah, I can talk about technology and a lot of the things we're doing at the Emissions Testing Center and how they help and all the different things we're doing on the innovation space. But I think where the most meaningful outcomes have come from have actually been from a policy perspective and the tier program in specifically the tier program. So what the tier program is, that for people that don't know the policy, it's essentially the industrial carbon pricing system in Alberta. It has a carrot and a stick approach. So it puts a price on emissions, and it also has an opportunity for emissions reductions. And in the methane space where we're talking about, there's been a large opportunity through the tier program to have meaningful emissions reductions through things like the pneumatic offset protocol and the vent reduction protocols. And those have driven just a huge amount of change really, really quickly. So for Tourmaline, that means all the way back in 2019, we replaced 3,400 devices that were pneumatic devices under that protocol. And when you're talking numbers, that makes a really meaningful difference. So that was over 200,000 tons of emissions reductions that came from that program. So as far as when we're talking about what people could learn, I think we're going to talk about the technology, and I'll talk more about that as we move on. But I think also there's a lot to learn from the policy perspective. And I would propose that Alberta's had some pretty great policy to get early, meaningful action on emissions reductions in this space.
So the work we did in Alberta was really all about value to operators, and that led to the development of an aircraft-borne technology that was a derivative of our satellite technology. So we have what we call a satellite aircraft hybrid offering to customers, where they can choose which makes more sense to them in their various jurisdictions. As Justin mentioned, when we did our initial scans over Alberta and over Canada, we actually found that we see an awful lot less than we see in other parts of the world. So we've wound up exporting that technology that was funded from Alberta to pretty much everywhere else in the world. Certainly the satellites see every region of the world, and our aircraft are now flying in Europe, in the United States, and Australia, and we're working to expand those to other jurisdictions as well. So it's that capability of combining different types of technologies that are valuable and useful to operators and governments in different jurisdictions that really was all started in Alberta.
It's hard to go at the end. So, Minister, and to the group, one of the questions I get most asked is from an innovation perspective, not the innovation in the technology, since that's been covered. I'll talk about the innovation in Alberta with respect to two things. One, we have Emissions Reduction Alberta here together with NGIF. And so Emissions Reduction Alberta, as you heard, supplies grants from its tier program to projects to lower emissions. And we have a common mandate at NGIF, as Minister said, Natural Gas Innovation Fund. So all of our work is around cleaner natural gas, our foundational fuel of Canada. And so we as in two agencies in Alberta who both want to work towards emissions reduction have come together many times. We've come together as a group and said, I've got in fact, Emissions Reduction Alberta had a natural gas challenge a few years back, and we were just launching our own competition at NGIF. Our money at NGIF for that competition comes from Tourmaline and 13 other industry partners. And so we worked together. So what is working together to do? Well, we have a technical peer review process. Justin and his team have a technical peer review process. And so together, we worked with our groups, we leveraged each other's work. And for companies like Stefan and his work, we ended up fast tracking some of these technologies faster to market because they didn't have to go through two sets of necessary peer review processes to award a grant. So that is innovation in itself. I haven't heard countries and jurisdictions outside of Alberta who are embracing the idea that you don't have to work in silos. You can actually work quite well together. And yes, we have our boards and our governance, and so we have to pay attention to that. But at the end of the day, it's a startup who's trying to get their technology to market to lower emissions in Alberta. And so we're two Alberta companies let's do it together. The second thing, Minister, that we have done in Alberta is we've brought technology, we brought industry who have an interest to use technology to drive their companies forward. Tourmaline is one of them. And so in our NGIF industry grants program, we have 14 energy companies, many of them competitors in Alberta, many of them who are looking to produce gas and competing with each other on a friendly basis. But these companies have said it's not important that respectively my company is the winner. What's important is that the gas industry itself that's in Alberta is more competitive than any other jurisdiction in the gas we produce. So let's do it together. And so from a technology and innovation standpoint, we have downtown Calgary companies and Alberta-based companies with their assets together reviewing projects and selecting them together and looking at accelerating them together. And that in itself, to your question earlier, something unique that's different that other jurisdictions can follow. That's something that Alberta does really well.
Well, and I love what you said there because I think it summarized what other partners on the stage had said, which there are a few reasons I think, well, why Alberta is unique. But I do think it is industry coming together, not as competitors, but I would say coming together to say, how do we solve these challenges together? And then also a different approach from, there might be approaches where governments take a very hard line and say, we're just going to set a target that we expect industry to follow. And if they hit it, great. And if not, follow up with very punitive measures. And our approach has been a lot different to say we want to partner with industry. And in fact, companies like Tourmaline, and I've got to give you a lot of credit because I think you were on the path of emissions reduction, specifically for methane, long before any government was requiring you to do that. And I think that's why the measurement piece is so important. And very excited to hear what you've said there, because I think even the pre-2014 methane emissions, it would have been great if we had more comprehensive measurement back then as well to help create a fuller picture of just how far we've come over the last number of years. So given how rapidly we were able to hit this 45% methane reduction target, what do you think is next? What do we need in terms of innovation or investments, in terms of what's necessary to keep that momentum going? But help us, many people say, well, we've captured much of the low hanging fruit. And so now, that next layer of emissions are going to be a little bit more challenging. And of course, keeping in mind that we still want to make sure that companies are economical, that we are keeping affordability and jobs and our workforce top of mind as we move forward. And maybe I'll start with you, Scott, on that one.
Sure. I like how you said low hanging fruit because that's kind of the way that we're moving through emissions reductions, especially methane emissions reductions. The tier program has kind of empowered you or enabled you to start with the biggest and most meaningful reductions first and kind of work your way up. The challenge is that as we're working our way up, it's not a linear progression. It's moving exponential. As we get to those higher and higher cherries in the tree, they're more and more difficult to get to in an exponential form. So that's why I'm so proud to be part of Alberta and have big giant ecosystems like this where you've got a whole panel of people that are working on technologies in order to have those solutions available to get to that really high hanging fruit. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a much more difficult challenge as we get to higher and higher percentages of methane reduction. And we need everyone in the space to really be working together in order to find those technologies to solve those solutions. Because we're not at the point now where you can just say, well, there's a technology solution, so it's going to be able to serve 100% of the market. We're going to need specialized technology solutions to get to where we can serve hundreds of percent of the market instead of kind of in the low 50s type of reason. So super excited what's coming. But again, because we have this type of collaborative approach in Alberta and we have everyone working together, I believe it's a challenge that we can take on with this methodology.
And maybe John or Stefan, I mean, coming from the other side of this, what are you hearing from our other partners, or even as one of these companies yourselves?
Sure, I'll dive in. So innovation for us, well, investment for us comes in two forms. One is continued innovation, and the other one is driving the adoption of technology in other jurisdictions. So we've taken what we learned in our work in Alberta and now have taken it to the next level. We're innovating ourselves with support from our customers to drive detection thresholds down. So will help our industry partners, our government partners really be able to find that next level. And yes, it does get exponentially harder because just so much more of it when you drive the detection thresholds down. But that's great because then, as you say, you can start with the biggest ones first and move your way up or down, depending on the analogy you want to use, to go find those smaller and smaller leaks. So we're with the accelerator that the kickstart that we got from our funding partners here in Alberta, we've been now able to take market revenue to then drive that next level of innovation. The other investment, though, is taking all that technology and driving it out to parts of the world that really can use it today. And a lot of that can be self-funded by the operators themselves because the innovation or the productions don't always require a lot of capital investment. In other parts of the world, you see a lot of unlit flares, for example, which or just methane slip from flares, which often has to do with control loops and how you would optimize your flaring. And just those two things have huge implications in places like the Middle East and Central Asia. So where new capital is required, that's what goes on in a place like COP, where there are new funding sources that are made available to developing countries, to other jurisdictions that do need to take that next step in capital investment, reduce their emissions. But we help them build the business case for that using the technology we develop in Canada and Alberta.
Thank you, Stefan. So, Minister, I'm going to make a shameless plug from some of the work that we've just started to do together. But it's a story that started quite some time ago. And to your point, Minister, with Tourmaline and their thinking well ahead of the curve that we need to be above the curve when it comes to emissions reduction. So I would say pre-COVID, so Tourmaline and NGIF, and if University of Calgary's in the room here, Ian Gates, where is he? There he is. So, Minister, and there's this, I'll get to the minister's help in a minute. We responded to a methane call that Alberta Innovates actually sent quite some time ago. And the idea so the 2.0 of methane technology companies getting to what will be 75% by 2030, these types of numbers. It just can't be standard status quo. We need to think outside of the box. We need to use innovation, and we need to find a way to mature these technology companies that we see often, but in a way that's a little different. So our concept was, and we've seen many, and these are good projects. A startup goes to an oil and gas company, and they spend 2 years there, and then the project does great work, and it has spent time de-risking, and it continues on its journey. What if we could put many technology companies in a single spot? So okay, so how can we do that? So a hub of methane technology companies was the concept in a single location where there's a leverage of experience and a leverage of knowledge that can come from having these particular companies in one spot. So we also needed to figure out a way to have technology companies who might not be ready to come to a big site, but maybe need to have some simulation testing first. So the concept of the NGIF ETC program was put together, and I won't go into the long story other than, it's not an overnight success. It took some time, as Scott knows quite well, in developing all this. But at the end of the day, you're going to hear more about the technologies coming out of the program in a minute, but we, through the help of initially Natural Resources Canada, and then Alberta Innovates, and then Prairies Can, instrumented a Tourmaline and University of Tourmaline gas production system of well sites and gas processing and drilling and completions and some other areas. We then went to University of Calgary and took some money and instrumented a bunch of labs. And the missing piece, which Stefan will understand, is it's a heck of a lot of work and money to be able to de-risk technologies, and there's a big valley, as we've all heard, to overcome. So what if we could have a user-free model, a model where in Alberta, startups could come to a particular location or could come into a program. They could have some free simulation testing at University of Calgary. They could have some free simulation testing at a Tourmaline perpetual energy owned plant. They can have some knowledge dissemination so that the ecosystem can know the good results, and there can be some additional commercialization support. And so we got it up and running and over COVID and after COVID, and there's a lot of work that went into that. And then most recently, which is the point, which is that Minister Schultz awarded us $15 million over 5 years to continue to operate the program. So what does that mean? It means for the next 5 years, startups, methane specific startups, can come into the NGIF ETC and then undertake their validation process, come through, and at the other end, we hope they'll be even more situated to be in a market adoption framework. And so innovation, again, Alberta is good at thinking outside the box. It's the first time we've ever done something like this, I think, in Canada, maybe even North America. And so we did it here in the province of Alberta.
Justin, do you have anything to add? I'm very excited about this, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the emissions testing center in just a second, but.
Well, I think John's story is an excellent example of the industry, the ecosystem, the government working together to solve a problem and address some of these challenges that you have in technology development. I guess one of the interesting things about our model at Emissions Reduction Alberta is because we're providing public funding into a lot of these technologies deployments, we get sort of a 30,000 foot view of the learnings from all of these deployments. What's working, what's not. Not all the projects we find move ahead, not all of them are successful, but it's those challenges that those companies confront that you can learn from and adapt from and get better at. And so what we've been trying to do and how we think we can help support scaling not only in Alberta but globally is beginning conglomerating the knowledge that we're learning from each of these projects and sharing them with policy developers, regulators, industry, not only here and globally. And we have a moral obligation to be sharing that information as we're investing that public money. We're doing a lot of that on carbon capture sequestration right now, as we've learned a great deal about the trials and travails and successes and challenges for carbon capture projects and feasibility studies we've helped to fund, and we're doing the same for methane measurement and mitigation. And I think we have to amp that up another level and get even better at sharing that and letting the globe know about the tremendous treasure trove of information, because we've tried by doing here much more so than a lot of other jurisdictions, and capturing that knowledge and that intelligence and sharing it globally is something what we're trying to do at COP, as well as through our online data portal and other summits, information seminars. I would just like to mention, we hosted a couple of weeks ago, the minister was there, the International Global Leading Carbon Capture Sequestration Conference in Calgary. The GHGT was the largest of its kind. We co-hosted this with the IEA, 47 countries represented, where we shared all of the learnings we've had in Alberta, as we've been a big test ground for CCS, for methane development. And so the world is waking up to what we have, but we have to get better at finding ways to share, both from the industry vantage point, ecosystem funders, as well as.
Well, now you've answered my next question already.
That was planned.
Somewhat. That was planned. That was very smooth. I think that there are a few key learnings here. And so one of them is everybody coming together to say, how do we solve some of these problems? And when we talk about Alberta innovation, I do see some heads nodding, and the Albertans in the room definitely know what we're talking about here, but it's the coming together of industry, of the innovators, the folks who are working on this technology in their basements or their garage, and also post-secondary, which I think is a key piece of this. But then also looking at it from both a regulatory, a policy, and an incentives perspective, all at the same time. And so I can tell you that touring the emissions testing facility was extremely eye-opening for me. And you did such an exceptional job when I visited of bringing all of those new innovators together in one space so that they could point to their very specific piece of technology on an actual facility and say, I developed that sensor, and here's what it's testing, and here's how we started, and here's now where we are selling these pieces of equipment around the world. And so it really brought it to life in terms of how these ideas began, how they're being used now, and where they're going to be used in the future, which I think was a pretty amazing thing for me to see. But it's one thing for me to see that in Alberta, and the next question being, how do we provide that leadership around the world when we look at what's happening globally, especially when we look at our international partners? I know Japan, Germany, our government has been working very hard on sharing our story and our technology and our learnings with countries like that. How can we do more of that?
So I can continue on with the Emissions Testing Center because it's had some great successes. It's been up and running now for 4 or 5 years, and we're very proud of how many companies have come through there. We're over 75 companies that have come through the Emissions Testing Center, and we're much above 100 as far as ones we've interacted with and have on the waiting list. So we're quite proud of there. Now there's quite a few companies that are starting to export internationally. So companies like Converge or Cube or GHGSat, lots of international aspects as well. And we just recently signed a memorandum with METAC as well, so that we can have direct collaborations with some of our partners in the United States as well. So quite proud of the work that's going on there and how those technologies will be there to help the rest of the world as well.
And by nature of operating satellites, for us, international collaboration is huge. We, on the industry side, work very closely with the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which is 12 of the world's largest oil and gas operators that really help us get the word out, not only within their corporations, which are enormous and a real challenge for any startup to go meet every one of them, but also to all their non-operated joint ventures and also to third-party oil and gas companies and national oil companies that otherwise it would take a long time to learn about how satellite monitoring and how aircraft monitoring can help them in their jurisdictions. So that's just one example. We also work on an aggregated level to work with the UN, work with the World Bank, work with the international financial institutions that are funding some of this methane mitigation around the world. So we've learned as we've gone along that it's a really important part of getting to methane reductions internationally to not only add value for operators so that they are motivated to do it themselves, but also work with partners and in financial institutions to help those that aren't so motivated to do it themselves to do it in a cost neutral way for them.
John.
So it's happening in a couple ways, Minister. First of all, in Alberta, we have companies that we've grown up here through the Emissions Testing Center, through our industry grants program. You mentioned one of them, Cube. If I don't think they're even here at COP, but so Cube grew up in Alberta and is now out there selling their solutions to global customers. In NGIF, those industry members that I mentioned, many of them have assets outside of Canada. So from a influencing methane emissions, some of these companies get directly introduced to places like Mexico, Australia, where our companies at NGIF have assets, or in some cases, customers. It's also happening in Alberta where we are attracting companies that are not Alberta based and we want to come here to leverage this ecosystem that we're talking about up on stage. CUVA is one of them. CUVA's at our Emissions Testing Center. It's been a fund. It's been a recipient of a grant through Emissions Reduction Alberta. Same with my organization. But CUVA wasn't based out of Calgary. They were based out of the US, and they came to Calgary because they saw an advantage in Calgary and in Alberta to leverage this granting ecosystem, a place to test, and now they've created an office. We've brought investment in, so that's a good thing. The final piece I'll say is that I also manage a natural gas venture fund, a venture capital fund for natural gas, and so happy to talk about that after. But the point there is that a third of the investment that comes into these Albertan companies are from Alberta-based investment community. 1/3 of the investment comes from the US to Alberta to invest in these companies, and 1/3 are international investors who come to Alberta. So the word is out there that we are building companies here in Alberta, and these companies are not only doing the great work here, but can also do the great work here in other parts of the world.
Now, I think we have time for one last question, and it builds on what we've already talked a lot about, which is public-private partnerships. How do we make sure that the private sector and the public sector are working together? How do we structure that to ensure that we are being able to deploy this more rapidly? Ensure access to sustainable funding. And then I would also just add in one of the key pieces that I think we could do a conversation just on this alone, but measurement and a common understanding of how we measure and how we report. Selfishly, obviously, being from Alberta and seeing all the great work that's happened there over time, I want to make sure that we are getting credit for the great work that happened long before government started paying attention to this issue. But how do you see the role of public-private partnerships moving this along even quicker into the future?
So nothing demonstrates success like success, and Alberta is one of the great jurisdictions who's demonstrated the success of methane mitigation through the public-private partnerships that we've been talking about on stage already. And I think now is the time to amplify, get our story straight, have a common aligned goal, and work increasingly on scaling and adoption. I think one of the things that we should be contemplating as a community of vested interest is magnifying a symposium or conference around our methane mitigation. We have one annually in Banff, PTAC posts, but I think our story is of such relevance internationally now that we should be magnifying this. And we already have a lot of the globe and those interested and motivated to do this to come and learn and see what's already happening on the ground here. I think we could amplify that as a community of supporters and help our companies get to that next level of implementation and show by doing. That, is one of the big things I think we're going to figure out a little bit more with our partners at NGIF and ERA is how can we better tell the story of the technology investments that have been made, the success that's being seen, the outcomes that could be reached, and then helping inform our government partners, our regulators and others in terms of what else could be done in the province to get to the next level, but more and just as importantly, help the globe get to increased outcomes on methane reduction.
Scott?
Perfect. So from like a forward-thinking company, being in a place like Alberta is incredible because you have all these opportunities for private money and public money and a lot of collaboration. So if I just, this is a pretty awesome stage because if I just go left to right, we could talk about how we've worked with NGIF through ventures, we've worked with NGIF through grants and also running the emissions testing center. If I go to GHGSat, we were part of some of the original funding through NGIF to kind of get up and running. We did a test for GHGSat with the ETC early on, and we're a proud customer of GHGSats now as well at this point. With ERA, we've gotten funding from ERA to build a hybrid drilling rig, and it was really important to Tourmaline. So that hybrid drilling rig is running batteries and natural gas in order to drill wells with less emissions. And all the way to the minister, the Tier Fund has been really helpful to help companies reduce emissions and to use offsets and all the different collaborative approaches in order to reduce emissions. So I would say this stage is a perfect example of how public and private funding can really work together in order to really make a meaningful difference.
I was about to do the left right too, but Scott, you beat me to it.
It's hard going at the end, isn't it?
It is,
Right?
isn't it? But no, let me just add that so we've worked with each of the parties on the stage here in different ways, public money, private money, and at the end of the day, creating value for operators and creating jobs in Alberta has been, part of the symbiosis here of having all these different groups together, working together, and ultimately for us as a company, driving growth and driving exports. So it's been a great relationship. It's been really important to our growth. I'd go so far as we wouldn't exist at the scale we are today if it had not been with the partnership with the groups at the table on the stage here today. So, for us, public-private partnerships are essential to our growth.
Okay, thank you. So again, at the end, I would say that there's more we can do. We've got a great example of how we're working together from a startup, industry, government, and multi-industry. But there's more money out there. And so the more this collaborative relationship can mobilize money from perhaps other sectors, countries that might want to come to Alberta, might want to come and see what we're up to and bring your technology. We're open for business. Bring your solutions here. This group and others in the Alberta innovation ecosystem can be quite supportive. Market adoption is critical to startups. And we have market adoption. NGIF, Emissions Reduction Alberta, has market adoption from the companies they've invested in, but there's more work. So if there's adopters out in the world of COP29, or if there are industry who see what we're doing and want to bring their technologies, that type of partnership from an industry perspective is really important. And then finally, there are other much larger funds that have lots of money, and we're happy to put that money to good use here in Alberta. As scaling companies takes money, it takes time. And so we just want to get it done faster so we can continue our emissions reduction journey.
Well, thank you all so much for taking time this morning and being part of this conversation. I know it reminds me partially of why I am so proud to be from Alberta. And it's not because I think we're doing such a great job, but it's because I think we're creating the right ecosystem for industry and innovation to thrive. So thank you very much for joining us here today. Now, I think Justin and I are going to do a quick announcement. We've got a lot of things going on here this morning. And so I would just, before we leave the stage, maybe if you could just let everybody know where can they find more information specifically on the Emissions Testing Center, the companies, the technologies that are found there. I don't know if that's a better question for John or Scott.
NGIF.ca is the Emissions Testing Center programs outline and work and apply here and all that stuff. There's a special site there. But Scott and I are here all day, so come and talk to us, and we're happy to have a conversation about how we can help you and your methane solution.
Yeah, and if you're back here on Saturday, then we're having an 1.5-hour session just on the Emissions Testing Center itself, and we'll dive deep into what NGF does and what the University of Calgary does, and how all that helps to the clean tech companies. So to get into the technology in a little bit more depth, then please join us then.
And sorry, Minister, just a quick plug for our new open data portal at eralberta.ca. Click on projects. You can search by any project we funded. You can search specifically on the natural gas end, and you'll have a better idea of the range of technologies that we've supported and their outcomes.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Minister.